US reports suggest that Iran secretly obtained a Chinese-made spy satellite in late 2024, which was allegedly used by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force to monitor and target US military bases across the Middle East. This comes even as the world is monitoring the situation at Hormuz closely, where the world wants a thorough solution. But if Donald Trump's statement is anything to go by, what he just announced earlier today could be a big turning point in the war. Not only did Trump announce that the Strait of Hormuz would be opened permanently, he also claimed that the Chinese are happy with his steps and in turn have decided not to send weapons in Iran. So is that really true? Tonight we decode how this could affect the war even as both sides gear up for the next round of negotiations. To talk more about the developments in the Middle East, joining us at the moment is Robert Danin, who's a principal at the Georgetown Global Strategies. At the same time, he served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs in the past. Thank you so much, Mr. Danin, for joining us. And let me begin with what President Trump has posted today on Truth Social. He says that he's permanently going to open the Strait of Hormuz and that China is very happy about it and that Beijing has agreed not to send weapons to Iran. How realistic is this announcement and what would it actually mean for regional stability?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Look, if it were to be the case that the straits would be open permanently and China would be a participant or a facilitator of this, that would all be to the good. This would help ensure trade and global stability, as it were. And the fact that China is involved means that they won't be a spoiler as well. So if it were true, it would be encouraging.
Right. But as someone who's watched the conflict in West Asia evolve over the last few weeks, how much of this is likely to be some kind of a pressure tactic and how much of it is likely to, just aimed at trying to get a faster resolution as far as the crisis is concerned? Because we've seen President Trump go back and forth, change his position, swing widely from one side to the other, whether it's blocking the Strait of Hormuz or the kind of statements that he's made about, wiping out an entire civilization, so on and so forth.
Correct. Well, I think you're right to be skeptical or not to weight his comments too heavily. In tracking this conflict, have noticed the vicissitudes that you pointed out in his statements, and so therefore I think you're right to identify it as part of the negotiation and part of a tactic to both influence the Iranians on the one hand, and at the same time to assure global markets and global partners that the situation is under control.
Right. But as someone who's been a long-time observer of the Middle East, is this still a sort of shadow war of proxies and airstrikes, or have we entered a new era of open escalation that we've seen? And in terms of the ceasefire attempts that we saw take place last weekend and, of course, are likely to take place again in the next 2 days, are we now at a phase where both sides seem to be pretty serious about arriving at a lasting peace? It's just a question about how they'll get there.
I hope that's the case, but I'm not sure. This is a very serious and dire situation. We are at war, at least, if not with ground troops, but clearly with air strikes and with missiles and drones. And so, people have been killed. The destruction has been massive. The disruption to the international economy is serious. So this is a serious situation. We had one round of negotiations. There's a lot of posturing that's taking place, hinting at the next round of talks. Hopefully that will be the case, but it hasn't been announced, hasn't been assured. Both sides clearly would like to see the end to fighting right now, but they want it on their terms. And the sort of zone of agreement has not yet been identified, and the signals are at times contradictory.
Right. So do you feel there's a very real threat that this might actually head back into a situation of war? How likely is it then to spiral into a wider regional conflict is something that many are fearing. Do you share those concerns?
Well, sure. I think the situation is very serious. There are reports today of additional American troops being sent to the region. So, we have not reduced our force presence in that part of the world. The potential for this to escalate is quite serious. So we're not out of the woods. We have a ceasefire. It is meant to last another week or so. And both parties are trying to reach an agreement to their advantage on their terms, or terms that they can accept between now and then. Whether or not that will be done, I don't think we can assume that that's going to be the case. And I think we have to be at least concerned that there could be a return to fighting.
Right. As somebody who served in the U.S. administration, how would you describe the current posture that Washington, D.C. is taking? Is it, for instance, trying to cap the escalation? Is it trying to manage the damage that has already been caused, or sort of subtly push Israel towards a more measured approach vis-a-vis its neighbors?
Well, I can't characterize it in one adjective right now. It's a complicated situation. Clearly, this administration has taken a very forward-leaning approach towards the use of force, towards launching this escalation against Iran in conjunction with Israel. I think right now we also have a second front, as you've identified, that's taking place between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is allied with Iran. So we have that element of conflict as well, which is sort of a derivative or subordinate to the larger conflict that's taking place in the Gulf. The thing that changed in the course of the 40 days of fighting is the fact that the Iranians successfully blocked the Strait of Hormuz, and that has been a major shift on the chessboard. So now you have the Americans pursuing objectives that were vaguely identified at the beginning of the conflict in late February, having to do with Iran's capabilities. But now, in addition, there's an effort to return to the status quo ante, which was the free flow of shipping through the Straits of Hormuz.
Right. Now, this is something that we see in terms of the naval assets that the U.S. has deployed in the entire eastern Mediterranean as well as the Gulf. It's also constrained some Israeli operations. What leverage does the U.S. still have over Israel's strategic choices, and where does that kind of leverage run out in your view?
Well, I think I wouldn't necessarily call it leverage. I would call it influence. I mean, this is a war that was launched and coordinated with Israel. So Israel has been a partner to the United States in this conflict, and clearly the United States is the senior partner here. And I think the political reality is, if and when the president of the United States has strong views about the conduct of the war, Prime Minister Netanyahu will take those under advisement and probably have very limited options, were they to differ from the president's.
Right. Now, one of the clear fault lines for long has been Lebanon when it comes to Israel and Iran, and that's also because of Hezbollah, of course. The talks that have taken place yesterday in Washington seem to have nudged things in the right direction, but Hezbollah seems worried. How worried should the region be if the two sides are talking? And do you see this as the first step in a major peace deal, perhaps, between Israel and Lebanon?
Well, I think what happened here in Washington yesterday, the beginning of talks between Lebanon and Israel towards the goal of a peace agreement between the two neighbors who have not enjoyed peace since 1948, at least, is an important first step. I think it was timed in order to try to remove that conflict from the negotiations and conflict between Israel, between the United States, and Iran. Clearly, Hezbollah is concerned because this is a direct threat to them. The explicit goal is to disarm and to remove Hezbollah as an independent military force within Lebanon, independent of the government there. So Hezbollah has right to be concerned for its future, and Iran has reason to be concerned because Hezbollah has been one of the proxies of Iran that has been a source of instability in the region. I think the other countries in the region would no doubt welcome the disarmament of Hezbollah, who they don't have any sympathy towards, and the longer-term prospects for peace and between Israel and Lebanon. The disputes between those two countries are actually quite limited. There are no real territorial disputes. There are no real, significant issues. They even removed the disputes over the maritime border previously. So the barriers to a peace agreement are not really in the weeds there, but it has to do the larger context that has to do with the larger Arab-Israeli conflict. Clearly, I think first of all, the fact that they're talking is an important first step, and when that deal can be concluded will be dictated by the larger regional geopolitics.
Right. I spoke to a member of parliament from Lebanon yesterday who told us that Iran has been using Lebanon card to its benefit for long. Of course, it's not something that's not well known, but do you see merit in that argument in the sense that will Lebanon then be able to disarm the Hezbollah, because Lebanon too has been taking advantage of the fact that Hezbollah has been part of the government, for instance, there as well in the past. How realistic is the possibility then that Hezbollah and the threat that emanates from it can be completely neutralized?
Well, one of the interesting developments that we've seen in Lebanon since the serious strikes that Israel launched against Hezbollah in the autumn of 2024 has been a real change in public opinion within Lebanon. Lebanon had been one of the countries very reluctant to make peace with Israel because it had not been part of a larger Arab consensus. So the view traditionally had been that Lebanon would be one of the last countries to make peace with Israel among the Arab states. But after the strikes against Hezbollah and the weakening of Hezbollah within Lebanon in 2024, we've seen an important shift taking place within Lebanon. They're still very divided. I'd say the majority of still seems to be against making peace today with Israel, but there's also a large undecided population, let's say, within Lebanon. And so those who are opposing making peace with Israel today in Lebanon have now become a minority, actually. So it's interesting. It's a shift, and I think as the talks proceed between Israel and Lebanon, and Hezbollah is identified clearly as the obstacle to that, then public opinion will shift. And, that will take a bit of time, but that will require leadership on both the Israeli and the Lebanese side. The fact that Israel is still striking within Lebanon obviously makes that more challenging, but it also raises the specter of what peace could actually mean. It could mean an end to this. It could mean an end to Israel occupying Lebanese territory today in order to root out Hezbollah. It is going to be a challenge. Hezbollah had amassed a formidable force within Lebanon against the military, against the state itself. But what matters is the political environment. If the political environment within Lebanon becomes hostile or inhospitable to Hezbollah, then their operating room is diminished, and it's much harder for them to maintain their legitimacy as a force within Lebanon, contrary to the will of the state.
Right. Now, while we've seen one round of talks fail, and given that Lebanon was believed to be the main sticking point with, Pakistan as well as Iran saying that Lebanon has to be included in the ambit of the deal, whereas US and Israel had a very different perspective saying that Lebanon's not part of the larger deal. In that sense, do you think that going into the possible second round of talks between US and Iran, do you think that this is one major sticking point that's largely off the table now?
Oh, absolutely. I think the fact that you had the talks begin yesterday here between Israel and Lebanon was specifically timed to remove that issue. It allowed the United States to, on the one hand, say what happens in Lebanon is not part of the negotiations in Iran, with Iran in Pakistan, but at the same time, it removes that sticking point. It removed the ability of Iran to claim that there needs to be a ceasefire for the negotiations to take place. So it's, in a sense, made the talks with Iran less complicated. I mean, Iran, going into the first round of talks, had put forward all sorts of conditions that it wanted in order for there to be negotiations. A lot of those conditions somehow disappeared. So you also see a lot of posturing on both sides, and that's why, to get back to where we started, when leaders from both sides issue public statements, they have to be sort of brought into a larger context, not taken with a grain of salt, but seen in a larger context of posturing and positioning for what will ultimately take place within the negotiating room, which is where things are really matter.
Right. Given the kind of deadlock that we're seeing as far as the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East is concerned, a lot of threats, a lot of back and forth going on. Meanwhile, we've seen movement of oil tankers and other commodity shipments completely come to a halt in that region. What do you think this means for other major countries in the world, particularly India, which is not just physically close, geographically close to the Middle East, but also is heavily dependent on the energy that comes in from there? What do we need to be prepared for?
Well, I mean, what this conflict has highlighted is the degree to which we live in an interdependent world, an interconnected world, and that what happens in some remote part of the world affects us directly, even though we aren't necessarily combatants or participants, as is the case for India. So you're watching something take place very far away from your country in which you don't have any real vested interest other than the fact that it's a lifeline for your economy and natural resources. And this is something the whole world is experiencing. And that is part of the Iranian leverage that they've exerted by closing the straits. They've basically put a chokehold on major parts of the world, saying, we're going to hold you, you're going to suffer as a result of this these American launched hostilities. And that puts pressure on the United States most directly. It also affects us directly because it affects our economy as well. So it's a major issue. It must be very difficult to watch from afar where you are.
Absolutely. And thanks so much, Mr. Robert Danin, for joining us, sharing with us your perspective on what we can expect in coming days, and of course, the past history of such crises as well. Thank you so much for joining us indeed.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.